And welcome once again to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, iHeartRadio, Simul Radio, and Simul TV. If you'd like to check out the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Roy Heizer, and Roy is a professional tour guide, and he has been one for over a decade. He has conducted the Squares of Savannah History Tour as well as the Winston Salem Ghost Tour. Mr. Heizer has also written several books, including Cincinnati Cemeteries, Hauntings and Other Legends, and Haunted Charlotte, Supernatural Stories from the Queen City. He also has been in several movies, including The Conspirators, Savannah, Crackerjacks, Susie's Hope, and Dog Ears. Joining me now is Roy Heizer. And Roy, welcome to the X Zone.
Thank you for having me.
How did you get interested in the weird, the bizarre, the paranormal, the living and the dead?
Well, I guess I came by it quite naturally. My mother was very in tune to the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
She had several supernatural experiences while I was growing up, and those were part of our family lore. My father, meanwhile, was quite the sleuth, quite the detective. He loved a good mystery, and so I guess between those two, I was raised with it.
When did you have your first paranormal experience?
When I was about 12 years old. Mm-hmm. A very dear childhood friend of mine, my best friend, a guy named Michael, vanished. And he didn't just vanish in the typical sense of the word. He literally vanished along with his family. Literally 1 week to the next. I would go and play at his house on a Saturday morning, and then then the next Saturday he would come and play at my house and thus and such. And one Saturday I went to play at his house and everything was fine and no big deal. And then the next Saturday my father took me over to play with him on Saturday at his house, and he was gone and his family was gone. Everything was gone. Every stick of furniture in the house was gone. My father, being somewhat of a sleuth or a detective, tried to find him, looked for school records or a forwarding address or a forwarding phone number, and they just simply vanished. When we got to the house, there was no one there. The house was a ghost house. And, I've heard several theories over the years, but I've come to believe that it was something paranormal.
Why?
Because we had been best friends for several years. And if it had been, his dad got a new job or he's moving or he's changing schools, he would have written me a letter or given me a phone call. And I never heard from him again. Never got a letter, never got a phone call, nothing. No way to track him, no way to trace him. Granted, his name was somewhat common, but yeah, I've never been able to find him again.
But
I have no other explanation.
But once again, that doesn't prove it had anything to do with the paranormal.
No, not conclusively. But that's what I've been left with.
But isn't it strange if it was the family that disappeared without a trace? All right, maybe. But to have their furniture there and everything else gone as well, it sounds like it was a middle of the night skip and run.
Could very well have been. There could have been any number of explanations. My father went to the neighbors and they said, we're subdivision. We didn't see any truck pull up. We didn't see any moving van pull up. No forwarding address. My dad went to the school and the records were just gone.
What did his father do, your friend's father?
You know, that's part of the mystery. I don't know what he did. I know that the mother was a medical student,
Mm-hmm.
and she was at the medical college.
Is it possible that his father worked for the government in such a position where they had to do things in a very secretive way?
Could have been.
You see, I'm an ex-cop. I'm an ex-police detective. Like, I wasn't a sleuth, I was a real detective. And I'm just trying to understand how there's a tie here to the paranormal where absolutely nothing that you've described in this case can be classified as paranormal.
Well, that's part of the mystery. There certainly would be real-world, of this earth explanations for it.
Mm-hmm.
He could have been in the witness protection program.
Possibly.
Father could have been into drugs
Mm-hmm.
and needed to get out of town quickly. But I would have thought, given how good of friends we were, that Michael would have at least at some point sent me a letter or a phone call and said, "Hey, this is what's happening."
Right. Let me ask you this question: do you believe in ghosts?
Yes,
Why?
I do.
Why is that, sir?
Because my family
Mm-hmm.
has those experiences. I've watched my mother go through several paranormal episodes, as you might call it, and she wouldn't have lied to me. And so I feel like that if it happened to her, if she experienced something from the paranormal world,
Mm-hmm.
then it's entirely possible that it's true.
Have you
And I've had some weird circumstances myself, just bizarre things, felt someone in a room
Mm-hmm.
or seen something that didn't otherwise make sense.
But have you seen a ghost?
I've sensed a ghost. Have I seen
Mm-hmm.
a full-body apparition?
Yeah.
No. But I have sensed that someone else was in the room with me, or someone else was around, or something else. I haven't seen a ghost as in a diaphanous figure before me,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe it exists.
What is your definition of a ghost?
The presence of someone who has passed on, whether that's
Mm-hmm.
a physical presence that someone can see, or just a sense that someone gets, a feeling that someone gets, that they describe as coming from or about someone that they've known or seen.
Right.
I think also you can say that a memory is a ghost. It is a residual after effect of
Mm-hmm.
someone's involvement in your life. Someone passes on, and maybe you don't see a physical ghost, but when you think about them or you remember them, to me that's a form of an apparition. They are with you. Their spirit, as it might be, is with you.
Why do you think some people, when they pass, remain ghosts on this planet, and others seem to go wherever ghosts go?
Well, most of us that believe in the paranormal and believe in ghosts would attribute that to someone who died young or died in the middle of their life going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you hear very few stories about ghosts of elderly people. Elderly people have lived a long life. They've lived their full life. They've raised their kids. They've done what they're going to do. Their bodies have grown weak and tired, and they're ready to go on. At some point, they become ready to go on. And so most apparitions, at least that happen historically, happen to younger children or middle-aged people who are in the stream of life, and they're sort of plucked out through circumstances. And so that continuation, that continuity, leaves a ghostly residue.
All right, Roy, stand by. You and I have to take our first break. Exo Nation, Roy Heizer is our special guest. CINCINNATIGhostTour.com. And Roy and I will be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Roy Heizer is our special guest this hour, X Zone Nation, CINCINNATIGhostTour.com. Roy, before we went to the commercial break, you were saying that most of the ghosts, is it most of the ghosts that are young compared to senior ghosts that are seen?
Yes, that seems to be the case.
Okay. Are there any statistics to validate that? I've never heard that before, and I find it to be interesting.
I can't really quote you statistics per se, but the vast majority of ghost stories that I've heard from people on various ghost tours that I've taken, or ghost story books that I've read, that seems to be a common factor.
Okay. Tell us about your ghost tours. And first of all, when did you have your first ghost tour, and where was it?
Sure. Well, my first official ghost tour was in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I've since moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, and continuing that. But I've been giving tours, historical tours, for well over a decade. But the ghost tours, this is my 8th year.
And would you say that most ghost researchers or paranormal investigators, when it comes to ghosts, are more historians than they are anything else?
I would say that would be a good description. Certainly, you would have to have a historical curiosity. I'm sure some people have other motives, but yes, most of us are interested in the history tours. History behind the stories on the tours. In fact, most good ghost stories lay in some sort of history as well. And if not history, they certainly tell us something about ourselves, about the human condition.
And how I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
Well, on the Cincinnati Ghost Tour, for example, if you peel away the ghost stories, it's really just a history tour. Underneath it, one comes away learning a lot about the history of Cincinnati.
I was just going to ask you, how haunted is Winston-Salem?
It's actually quite haunted. There are a great number of stories there. They've got an old historic cemetery named God's Acre. It's a Moravian cemetery. It's set up sort of in an unusual manner compared to most cemeteries, according to their religious tradition of the Moravians, and that is definitely an active graveyard. There is Old Salem, which is the old historic part of Winston-Salem, and that's definitely got some ghosts roaming around down there, including Dr. Veerling, who was the original town doctor, who is said to haunt his home and office.
Wow.
And there's several ghosts over in a neighborhood called the West End.
What is your favorite story when you were doing your ghost tour in Salem, Winston-Salem? What was your favorite ghost story that you enjoyed telling the people on your tour more than anyone else?
Probably the story of the two boys that were best friends who met a girl or noticed a girl that they liked very much, and she was at the women's college, there, and they both caught her eye and began to pursue her, and she realized that she could only take one boy's hand in marriage. And so what are two boys in love with the same woman to do in the early 1800s but have a duel? And so they came to the outskirts of Winston-Salem, out into the wooded area, an area known today as the West End, and they had a duel. And one of the boys won, and one of the boys didn't win. And so the boy that didn't win became a ghost,
right,
and haunts the place where they had the duel. And the other boy spent the remainder of his life feeling guilty about the duel. And then when he passed on years later, he too came back to that place where the duel happened. And so the ghostly spirits of both boys haunt that. It was an old barn, an old brick barn on the outskirts of town, and both boys are known to haunt it.
Wow. Now, on these ghost tours that you did in Winston-Salem, as well as the one that you do in Cincinnati, do people ever have an experience that they were just shocked to have?
We've had several people that were very surprised. We've had people frightened. They've seen things in windows or down an alley, or they've felt something come over their shoulder or a presence of some type, and been startled and been quite frightened. We've had several people scream out loud. We've also had several people take some very interesting photos over the years, not just your usual orbs, but several other types of photos that were shocking. You know, with the digital cameras today, you can look at your photos right away.
Yep.
And we've photographed some interesting things.
How do you, as a professional tour guide, deal with skepticism on the tour?
Well, I really like skeptics. One of my favorite parts of the tour is having someone at the beginning of the tour say to me, you know, I don't really believe any of this.
Right.
It's all hogwash. You know, my wife dragged me along, and I'm just here because she made me come along on the tour. But I'm going to do you the courtesy of paying attention. And then, you know, that same person at the conclusion of the tour come up to me and say, wow, that was really neat. I learned so much. And, you know, I'm going to give this a second look, or I've become a believer, or yeah, you really convinced me that, you know, this is true and I should take another look at it. That's got to be one of my favorite things. I love winning over the skeptics.
I guess it would be. What is the weirdest or scariest thing you've had happen on a ghost tour, Roy?
Well, one time here in Cincinnati, we actually had a lady have what I might call an out-of-body experience to some degree. We were standing around in a bar called Arlen's Bar, and we were kind of out in an open area. It was a weekday night. The bar was kind of mostly empty. There wasn't really anybody around except our little group.
Right.
And a lady came along out of nowhere. The way Arlen's is set up, there's no real way to walk into that open area without being seen. It's a very long, narrow bar. And she didn't come walking down the bar. She didn't come out of the patio area. She just appeared out of nowhere and fell flat on the floor.
Oh, boy.
Arms underneath her, chair flying across the room. And, you know, obviously the bartender came over and looked at her and thought, you know, maybe we should call an ambulance. And I thought it was best to get my group out the door and on to our next stop, because if they were going to have, you know, medical people come in, they needed their space.
Sure.
And so the next night, you know, we saw the ambulance come, and the next night we were back in there again, and I asked the bartender, what about that woman from last night? And he looked at me in all seriousness and said, what woman? The woman who fell on the floor. that kind of appeared out of nowhere. And again, he was like, "What woman?" And the one you called the ambulance on. And he said, "We didn't call an ambulance last night." And yet the night before there had been this woman. I mean, maybe he was pulling my leg, but he seemed serious to me.
Why do you think ghosts hang around bars?
Hang around
bars, where alcohol is served?
Bars?
Yeah.
Well, ghosts are really just manifestations of people. They're the spirit or the energy of people. And so ghosts are really not that different than us, except they don't have their corporal body. They want acceptance and attention. They want to be included. They want to have friends. They want all the things that you and I want. And so a bar is a natural environment for that. Most bars are friendly, happy places that people go to have a drink and meet up with their buddies and have a good time and a few laughs and ghosts want those same things. Ghosts want to carry on doing what they were doing. And so given the community and the friendliness of most bars, it's a natural extension.
All right, Roy, please stand by. You and I have to take our news break for the bottom of the hour. And Exonation, our guest this hour, is Roy Heizer. And if you would like to get a hold of Roy, if you're in the Cincinnati area and you'd like to take Roy's tour, his website is CINCINNATIGhostTour.com. That's CINCINNATIGhostTour.com. And Roy and I will return on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, the X Chronicles newspaper is available for one and all with our compliments and has been since 1990. And to get your complimentary copy, which this month is 92 full-colored pages, I should say, visit online where you can read it online or download it from www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. Roy Heizer is our guest. He is the owner and operator of Cincinnati Ghost Tour. Their website, CINCINNATIGhostTour.com. Roy, before we went to the news break, we were discussing why a ghost would hang around a bar. And you brought up some very interesting points, like people go to the bar to have a good time. Most bars are friendly places, and ghosts just want to hang around and be happy. But how can they do that if no one can see them and no one can hear them?
Well, I think that's why we have the classic ghost story that we have. In most ghost stories, a spirit is attempting to make contact. That's why you get stories about, I felt a cold chill on my shoulder, or I felt someone take my hand, or I saw someone across the room. Those are their attempts, because they don't have a corporal body, to make contact with us, to keep that connection with the broader human spirit going. And so you'll often hear stories of ghosts making sounds or making noises or flicking light switches. And I believe that those are simply attempts to get a hold of us, to get our attention.
But if they don't have a corporal body, how can they manifest an image of themselves? How can they flick on a light switch? How can they make sounds of moving down a hall or walking upstairs? How do they do that? How do we explain that?
Well, all of those things are triggered by energy. It takes energy to flip a light switch, or it takes energy to make a sound, or to step on a creaky stair. And ghosts are just another manifestation of energy. What we call the spirit or the ghost is the inner energy of that person. And even though the physical body may not be there, the energy of that person is there. And when there's energy, you get friction. And when you get friction, you can then get sounds or light switches or noises. And that's why often ghosts present in a diaphanous state, diaphanous meaning half invisible, because they can't quite, they don't have the same level of energy we have, or the same type of energy to be fully seen. Okay. But they can manifest enough energy to be invisible.
All right, I can understand the aspect of energy, but energy, in order to represent a form, must be contained by a form. So how does the ghost maintain the form of its past existence? Now, the human body has energy, but the clothes that are seen on ghosts and reported, whether it be a Confederate Army uniform, whether it be somebody from the early 20s, anywhere in history where these ghosts are alleged to be seen, wear these clothes. So how does the ghost, or where does the energy from inanimate objects, non-living objects, come from to manifest themselves at the exact same time, the exact same place as the apparition is?
Well, I, for one, am not sure that they do. Okay. Nowhere on any of my ghost tour do I describe a ghost as being fully dressed in their original clothing.
Right.
I believe that a ghost is the spirit of the person, regardless of clothing or a hat or glasses or anything someone might wear. But that's also why ghosts manifest themselves in a number of different ways. Sometimes all they can manage is to make a sound. In ghost hunting, we talk about orbs a lot. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people sort of laugh at orbs occasionally, but they can be manifestations of energy. Certainly they are light energy, if nothing else, but they're not a fully formed human, as we know a human. And so an orb can float around in the air, and it's just a speck of energy. And it may be a speck of energy that produces its own light, or it may be a speck of energy that simply reflects surrounding light. So I'm kind of a believer in orbs, even though I realize that some people sort of laugh at them as being kind of silly. But they are a source of energy. And so if they're a source of energy, they certainly could contain the remnants of someone or something.
How do we know that the majority of orbs that are reported on the internet are actually specks of energy instead of dust, moisture, or insects?
Well, I think we're looking at that the wrong way around.
Okay.
All orbs are specks of energy. So the question isn't whether they are specks of energy, because they are all specks of energy, mm-hmm. either producing or reflecting light. The question is, are they paranormal? Are they the spirit or the embodiment of a person or an animal or something? And so, like you mentioned insects, for example, I don't see why an insect couldn't have the same sort of spirit that a cat or a dog or a person would have.
I'm not saying they don't.
They're a living being. There's all probability that they would. And so the question about orbs isn't, is it energy? The question is it paranormal?
And
I believe in some cases it is, and in some cases it isn't.
So how do you differentiate between the two?
Well, that's where an investigation would come in. That's where you would need corroborating evidence.
Such as?
Just a generic photograph doesn't tell you much of anything.
Right.
If you, for example, have video and there's an orb in it, and, you know, a car goes by in the distance and their headlights come through your window and poof, you see an orb. Mm-hmm. That may just be energy.
Right.
But if there is another piece of evidence to go along with that video that would lead you to believe that that orb is something more, for example, is there any audio associated with that orb? Are there multiple orbs? Does the orb transform into something? Is there any other activity in that house or building that would lead you to believe that there was paranormal activity there?
So what would some of the evidence be that orbs are real? Orbs are actually particles of energy of someone who has departed and is no longer a human, but are now pieces of energy floating around in these orbs.
Sure. Again, you would need some other evidence to go with it. Otherwise, it's inconclusive. And that other piece of energy evidence could be other sightings, manifestation, sounds, noises, or something picked up on a piece of detection device.
Why do you think the paranormal is so popular these days?
Well, because I think people are curious. They're curious about humanity. Mm-hmm. They're curious about the afterlife. It is an extension of a fear that humans have of dying. It comforts people to know that life doesn't just end at death, but there is something beyond.
But we don't know that. But we don't know that for sure. This is all speculation.
No, of course not. Of course, it's all speculation. You're absolutely right. It's all speculation. Mm-hmm. That's why we do the investigations. That's why we continue to be curious about it.
Yeah, but doing an investigation and coming up with something that is inconclusive, what does that tell you?
Well, a particular investigation may come up inconclusive, but that doesn't mean that all of them do at all times in all places. And so you have to keep investigating and keep exploring and keep learning.
So let's say the day comes that somebody out there comes up with the smoking gun that ghosts are real and that there is an afterlife. What happens after that point?
I doubt that will ever happen, because I rather suspect that there's an equal number of people that would say that it was false, that it was not true, or have a different point of view. Mm-hmm. While I believe in ghosts and talk about ghosts being real and explain why I believe in ghosts, there's someone else spending just as much time and energy convincing themselves and others why ghosts are not real. And what is conclusive to one person isn't always conclusive to everyone.
I've got about a minute before I have to take my next break. Would you say that the entire concept of the paranormal is based on the belief of the person who's looking into it?
Yes. Yes.
All right, stand by.
A lot of it depends on where you come from.
All right, stand by, sir. We have to take our final break. In X Zone Nation, Roy Heizer is our guest this hour. Cincinnati Ghost Tour. Their website is www.CincinnatiGhostTour.com. We'll be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone with yours truly from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget three websites to check out: www.xzbn.net, www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com, and www.simultv.com. Exonation, Roy Heizer is our guest this hour, CincinnatiGhostTour.com. You also conduct Cincinnati cemetery tours as well as Sinister Cincinnati walking tour. Tell us about both those walking tours.
Sure. The Cincinnati Cemetery Tour is a stroll through the Wesleyan Cemetery. It is the oldest continuously operating cemetery in greater Cincinnati. It's not the oldest cemetery, but it's the oldest continuously operating one that's still open for burials.
Mm-hmm.
It dates to 1842, and that tour is mostly a history tour. We tell a couple of ghost stories along the way, but that tour is mostly about the history of the graveyard itself and the history of several of the people buried in the graveyard. Now, the Sinister Cincinnati tour is sort of a non-paranormal version of the ghost tour, where we tell stories about the 5 serial killers that have plagued Cincinnati. Charles Manson is from Cincinnati, and we talk a bit about him, as well as some other weird things that have gone on in Cincinnati's history that are not necessarily paranormal.
Now, during the tour through the cemetery, has anything strange, weird, or bizarre happened to you or your groups?
No. Like I said, that's mostly just a history tour.
Right.
I also conduct that tour during the daytime, so it doesn't have the ambiance of the night like the ghost tour does. But it is a fascinating old graveyard.
Okay. What is the funniest thing that has happened to you as tour guide on the paranormal tour or paranormal walk?
Oh, well, yeah. I had a lady come on the tour one time. Seemed like a nice lady. Mm-hmm. She would listen very closely to a lot of the stories, and several of the stories she sort of pulled the punchline, so to speak, and would sort of guess out loud where the story was going or how it was going to conclude.
Right.
And so that was sort of different. Most people don't do that. And at the end of the tour, she comes up to me and says, this is a while back when I was just taking cash at the conclusion of each tour for your ticket. She came up and said, I don't have any cash. I can't afford to pay for this. I didn't bring any money with me. And then she started laughing, and she had this really sort of quirky, funny laugh. And, what can you do? You can't have her arrested. You can't run her down the street.
Right.
You just sort of have to do it on the honor system. And so what I ended up getting paid for that tour from her anyway was a funny story. And we've laughed about that several times over the years, how she sort of boldly came up and proclaimed that she couldn't pay for the tour. But she was funny to have along, and so we got a funny story as payment instead of the usual.
How many days of the week do you do your ghost tour?
We do the ghost tour every Friday and Saturday in September and October, and then Saturdays the rest of the year.
And how many people do you usually take per tour?
Well, it varies. In September and October, it can be anywhere from 4 to 40 people.
Wow.
40 is sold out.
Mm-hmm.
And in January and February, it might just be 2 people.
Are you the only tour guide on the Cincinnati Ghost Tour?
Yes, I'm a one-man show.
What are the best qualities for someone listening tonight who thinks that they'd like to become a ghost tour guide in their town or their city, wherever they are? What advice do you have for them?
Well, to be a good ghost tour guide, you have to be willing to give up your weekends. I've tried to hire additional guides, and during the interview process, the main issue with people is they don't want to give up their Friday and Saturday nights to go to give a tour. So you really have to love it. You really have to be passionate about it. You have to be a good speaker. You have to be able to talk articulately in front of a crowd, not get too nervous, or you have to be able to tell a story in a fairly straightforward manner. You have to be able to handle people if they're drunk. Hopefully we don't get that very often, but once in a while, I suppose. Or any other instance that comes up, have to be able to handle that. And you have to be entertaining. I've been on ghost tours where the guide just walked around, pointed at the building and said, somebody died there and now there's a ghost, and on to the next spot. And you really have to be able to tell a story.
How do the members of Cincinnati's general public feel about the ghost tours?
Oh, very enthusiastic about it. We get lots of rave reviews. People that call and just ask about the tour. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the people that come on the tour. I suppose there's a few people around Cincinnati that don't like the idea of a ghost tour. They're entitled to that opinion, of course. That's fine, but the vast majority of people think it's great fun.
How long is each tour, Roy?
90 minutes.
And how many different locations do you visit in 90 minutes?
We have 19 different locations on the current tour.
Mm-hmm. And what is the distance of the tour? A mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles?
Little over a mile.
So it's basically in the downtown core of Cincinnati?
It's in a historic neighborhood called Clifton,
okay.
Which is part of Cincinnati proper. It's a neighborhood that dates to 1849, mm-hmm. and so it's got over 160 years of history. Lots of Victorian-era homes. It was a wildly popular area during the Victorian era.
What is the history of Cincinnati?
Well, it started in 1788, and was started, of course, because of the Ohio River. Mm-hmm. It was a stop along the Ohio River. It's always been an industrial town. One of its nicknames is Porkopolis, which is a nod to the pork packing trade that made many local businessmen originally quite wealthy. But there was also a lot of trading up and down. It was a major stop on the Underground Railroad as slaves escaped the South and moved further north into Ohio and then on into Canada. Mm-hmm. It was a major stop on the Underground Railroad. It's also been a broadcasting epicenter for the Midwest.
And let's not forget WKRP.
And WKRP, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. What are your final thoughts for the members of the X-Zone Nation listening to you around the world tonight, Roy?
Well, I just hope that everyone enjoys going to ghost tours, mm-hmm. and enjoys engaging with that history and those stories, enjoys that, and comes on out and visits us at Cincinnati Ghost Tour. But there's lots of great ghost tours across the country. You can find them all over the place. Mm-hmm. They are wildly popular across America. And so wherever you are, you can come out and see a ghost tour. I've seen them in both Toronto and Ottawa, and they're great.
Where can people get copies of your book?
They can get it on Amazon, on the Internet, and then they're also at a bookstore chain called Barnes & Noble, and another bookstore chain called Joseph Beth.
We've got about a minute and a half left. I'd just like to touch briefly on your media credits: Conspirators, Savannah, Crackerjacks, Susie's Hope, and Dog Years. How did you get into the film industry as well?
Well, that really was serendipity. I was living in Savannah, Georgia, doing a history tour, and they literally put an announcement in the newspaper for thin guys with beards. And I'm a thin guy with a beard. And so they hired me to be an extra in that. And so they gave me an outfit to wear, and I got to meet Robert Redford and be in several scenes in the Robert Redford film, The Conspirator. Mm-hmm. And that was an awesome experience. And so I went on to be in a movie called Savannah with Jim Caviezel. and I was an extra in that. You can see me in several of the scenes in that movie. And then when I moved to Winston-Salem, they were filming the movie Susie's Hope, which is a movie about a dog law, an animal abuse law. And so I was an extra in that. And I've just really enjoyed being an extra over the years.
Roy, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Great talking to you. And Exonation, if you'd like more information on our guest this hour, Roy Heizer, his website is CINCINNATIGhostTour.com. I'll be back on the other side of this news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And for all the broadcast schedules on the X Zone Broadcast Network, one website, xzbn.net. And for the broadcast schedule of the X Zone TV channel on SimulTV, SimulTV.com. I'll be back on the other side of this break. My name is Rob McConnell, and this is the X Zone.